I was watching Matt Walsh's YouTube channel, and apparently prosecutors got a hold of Luigi Mangione's diary. There were details in there that he decided to go ahead and try to assassinate Brian Thompson, the CEO of UnitedHealthcare, and he was successful. But the diaries detailed how his original plan didn't involve Brian Thompson at all. He actually decided to go with the Brian Thompson idea instead of attacking the headquarters with a mass casualty event, which was ultimately his first idea. Now, the reason Matt brought this up is because the reason people were so supportive of Luigi wasn't because he was innocent. He was guilty as sin. But what everybody was okay with was the idea that this guy was going to unalive this CEO, Brian Thompson, in the name of a good cause.
Luigi shouldn't be going to jail because, for real, he was really doing the Lord's work. I mean, I feel like he saved some lives, if you ask me.
When in reality, the guy was willing originally to take out multiple people in a mass casualty event. Now let's think about this. If he ends up taking out multiple people, would anybody have supported him? No, you'd be a fool to support a guy that takes out 15, 20, 30 people, right? But because he took out this one guy who, by the way, Matt pointed out, we still haven't heard one bad, evil thing that this guy did, other than the fact that he was married with kids and he happened to be a pretty loved and good father and family man, right? So it wasn't like he did anything particularly evil. And we discussed back then that his annual salary was $10 million, which is a lot. But I mean, every single football player and basketball player that we cheer for on any given night makes much more than $10 million a year. So this guy chose to make this guy a mark, right? And he was also hoping that it would look like a greedy guy got whacked at the annual conference. In other words, he would have been totally okay if somebody else would have ended up taking the rap for this. Now, I think that shows you a lot about an individual. If you also remember, we made some predictions back then before Luigi was captured. We predicted that he was probably smart. He ended up being his high school valedictorian, right? And I think he went to Penn. We said that he was probably rich. He was filthy rich, went to all the nice private schools, and on top of that, I think his family actually made most of their money dealing with health insurance to some effect. So the reason Matt was upset about this was apparently 6 months ago when this happened, a lot of his fans had kind of abandoned him because he, like me back then, was saying, hey, I don't care if you think it's valid. I don't care if you think it's for a good cause. There's never a good reason to unalive another human being. And the guy that they unalived was the epitome of a good person, even if he worked for the dreaded insurance companies. So I thought that was really fascinating. What I also think is fascinating is that over the past couple years, and only Mala and Sean would really know this, before that happened, I had mentioned, because we did a story from, I think, the Good News Network, about how valedictorians are just kind of special people. They almost always end up doing something really amazing with their lives and through their education, right? And I said to people on my walk that particular day, I said, wouldn't it be cool if we had like a show on TV called When Valedictorians Go Bad? And then just like clockwork, a couple months later, we hear about this valedictorian, Luigi Mangione, that unalives this UnitedHealthcare CEO, in the middle of a street. And what was weird is, if you remember, there was a bystander right there and he did not try to attack her. So I'm assuming he ultimately said, I want people to look at this as something that was worthwhile. And he actually succeeded, because we have a lot of good people, both left and right side of the aisle, both non-believer and Christian, that actually said it was valid. Guys, there is never a valid reason for taking another person's life unless it's in the defense of you or one of your family members. Can we agree on that? So I just thought that was really super interesting. So why does Matt mention that? Is it just because they released some of the guy's diary information? No. The reason he mentioned it is because now, if you look at some of these LA ICE riots and protests that are going on in Los Angeles, you'll notice by going to TikTok, there's pictures of police cars where people on the overpass are throwing giant rocks down and potentially injuring people. Do you have a right in this country to peacefully assemble? Yes. Do most of the times when people get together, do they usually end peacefully? Yeah, I'm pretty sure. You don't really hear too many situations where people get out of hand. But these things the last 5 or 6 days, specifically these ICE raids, have equated to people doing some pretty devious things. Do we as people validate certain things because we think that there's a bigger picture, a bigger story to it all? I would argue yes. And the Luigi Mangione diary just kind of proves that it's really easy for people to pull one over on us. If you fast forward to right before Mangione was caught, I don't know if anyone remembers this again other than maybe Mala and Sean, but I actually made predictions. I made a prediction that he would be a very smart person, like a valedictorian. It's very important that this guy has you believe and know that he is smarter than you and me in every way, shape, or form. And I'd be willing to bet that he comes up with some really good world-class ideas. He ended up being a valedictorian. I made a prediction that he would probably be ultra rich. By the way, odds are he's got plenty of money. So what that tells me is that while he wants you to hate this victim because the victim was rich, right? A CEO making 10 million a year, more than likely this guy comes from money. He ended up being ultra rich. I also made a prediction that there's a chance this guy could have just sought out Brian Thompson because he knew that that would be the one guy he could unalive where people might actually take his side for it. I think he was targeting this guy because in his super villain fetish that he has, it's very important that you get a guy that everybody dislikes. The world has already spoken on this. Think about this. What they've said really loud and clear is, we don't care if you catch him, and we're okay if you don't. Only the devil himself could get people to turn on their fellow man that quickly. And these diaries they found just kind of proves that that's what this smart valedictorian did. He was pre-calculated, and he was out to manipulate the masses, and it worked, hook, line, and sinker. This is why we should never, ever jump on the side of a madman that's basically taking people's lives. Yet half of the country, maybe even 3/4 of the country, again, regardless of political slant, were actually pro Luigi Mangione. So much so that I think we ended up raising as a country like close to $1 million for his defense. Here's the real crazy thing. Why in the world, in a country where we always hate the rich, why did we give rich ass Luigi Mangione close to $1 million for his defense? That is the rich getting richer. And that is getting good people to actually fight for the side of evil. And if it's that easy to accomplish, then that's got to be scarier than the scariest movie out there. Because it sounds to me like in the future, these things could happen more often. You can survive in a world where there's Chris Thompsons, right? You can survive in a world where there's CEOs of health insurance companies. You cannot survive in a world where there's an endless number of Luigi Mangiones. And I fear that one little incident might have really shown what a lot of us Americans are all about. We're willing to look the other way if it serves our purposes or if it fits with our ideological ideas on how society should be. I think that's yet again one of those things where in order to fix that, you got to really work on the man or woman in the mirror. Sean Ahern, 9511, says, am I the only person who doesn't keep a handwritten journal in 2025? Are you all documenting your premeditated crimes in diaries and I'm just out of the loop? Sean, that's another reason why sometimes I believe in the simulation. Because I tell myself, we've always been hearing about these people keeping diaries. And it somewhat made sense in the 18 and 1900s, right? Because people like to put their memories down in books and they didn't really have computers back then, right? But then all of a sudden nowadays, I don't know a single human being that has admitted to me that they keep a journal or a diary, yet we almost find out all the time that people do. So here's my question for you, Venters. Do you or anybody you know currently keep a diary or journal? It's one of those weird things where I feel like I've never met a single human being that does, yet we always find people do. Even the Kavanaugh situation with the U.S. Supreme Court. That woman accused him of doing those horrible things at that house party, X amount of decades ago. And some way, somehow, this guy ends up pulling out his diary and journal, opening it up and saying, no, I didn't do anything like that. It was the most bizarre thing. In my timeline, diaries and journals don't exist. Don't get me wrong, I've bought diaries and journals from stores with the idea that, hey, I'm gonna keep a diary. And I'll do it for maybe a couple of days to a couple of weeks. I've just never kept it going. As a matter of fact, the closest thing I've got to a diary now are my YouTube videos. I think Jesse kind of predicted this literally from start to finish. So if I put it all together in the right way, it might make for a halfway decent video. Here's the problem. Every time I have a halfway decent video where I'm like, hey, that was halfway decent, only 20 or 30 of you watch it. So if I end up putting the pieces of the puzzle together, reward me, Venters, by hitting the thumbs up button. And if you haven't subscribed yet, subscribe, because if there's one person in the world that pasted this puzzle together properly, it was your boy Jesse. And I think you have to give it up. I think he fooled a lot of us. But with me, I'm never fooled. You're always a bad neighbor in my eyes. By the way, a couple years back, I go into this place called Napoli's. It's a little Italian pizza place right next to my grocery store. And I see this woman with her adult son, and the adult son kind of looked like he was unemployed and stuff. And I knew that his mom was buying him and her lunch, And so I told the guy behind the register, I said, hey, I'm gonna pay for their meal. And I ended up paying for their meal, and then he ended up telling them, hey, it's on the house, this guy paid for you. And it was my good deed, and I didn't let them know it was me. I just took off before he told them. So it ended up being like a nice surprise. Well, today I'm eating breakfast in the Black Bear Diner, which is a place I've eaten a couple times over the past couple months. I like it. Pretty good breakfast if you've never been there. Anyway, make a long story short, the waitress goes, are you all finished? You want some more tea? I go, no, I'm going to be out of here. Just give me your check. Guys, she said somebody paid my bill and tip for me. Can you believe that? It made my day. I literally walked around for the next hour or two because I went up to the mall after that, and I was just stunned. It's almost like not only did they give me free breakfast, but because they paid for that breakfast, it was almost like they gave me a $20 or $25 coupon if I wanted to buy something in the mall. And so it just ended up making today a nice day into a really special day for me. Vanda Pietri Antonio says, rioting, looting, destroying property, and causing terror is never for a good cause. Vonda, your parents raised you up well. Sometimes there are silver linings in dark clouds, right? Sometimes you can have a horrible thing like looting and rioting and people getting hurt, and something positive can come from it, but you shouldn't go around trying to cause havoc and destruction hoping that you get a silver lining out of it. So I agree with you. There are better ways to solve problems than violence and taking people's lives. At LEHXYX says, I don't support Luigi, but I'm not wasting a breath defending someone who indirectly killed people either. So again, this goes back to put yourself in Brian Thompson's shoes. If you were the CEO of UnitedHealthcare and you're married and you're taking care of your family and maybe you go to church every weekend and maybe you support a bunch of people with that money, most people would look at you and say, you seem like a pretty decent human being. I'm sure Brian looked at himself in the mirror and said, I'm a pretty decent human being. I'm trying to do things the right way. And all of a sudden, this guy named Luigi just takes him out. They never met each other, didn't know who one another was. And I'm supposed to be on Luigi's side? No, my friends. No, my friends. Only the devil could get me to be on Luigi's side. So if you're on Luigi's side and you think you're a good person, just ask yourself, if that wasn't Brian Thompson but me, and I just happen to be the CEO of UnitedHealthcare and someone takes away my life, Am I going to be cool with that? Is my family members going to be cool with that? Because that CEO has family members that to this day probably miss him every single day. I'm telling you, we lack empathy in this world, Mala. We lack empathy, Carla. I could never imagine taking anyone's life and validating it because there's portions of this life that suck. I think there's way better ways. Luigi is smart enough, he could have found a way to solve problems using his brain. Instead, he wanted to use something that we've had for hundreds of years. He wanted to use a gun and a bullet. All he did was cause pain. He didn't cause joy or happiness. Son of Tanavest, 1197 says, it is still crazy to me that anybody idolizes this man. Luigi is an unaliver, plain and simple. I know. It is crazy. I bet you there's a lot of good Christians that are pro-Luigi, and they don't even realize how awful that sounds. At Kathy, C7E says, Luigi knows how the left thinks. He knows that they would make him a hero. Imagine the pain the family of the victim is going through watching these idiots praise Luigi. When you validate something based on a good cause, then all of a sudden you can validate everything that's evil based on a good cause. There's always two sides to the story. Depends on what side you're on. If someone's on the opposite side, they're the bad guy. That's why we can't sit there and say what's right and what's wrong. You just have to say taking someone else's life is never right. What is right is trying to stay alive on this planet as long as you can, because there are people that care about you, just like the UnitedHealthcare CEO. The way we can do that is to walk every single day, drink water every single day, and try to stay out of trouble and avoid sugar while you're at it. Have a great night. Keep walking. I'll see you tomorrow.